Let me tell you something that might surprise you. Most people don't fail because they aren't capable. They fail because they're afraid of what failure might say about them. So they play it safe. They wait, they hesitate, and slowly opportunity passes them by. But here's the truth I've learned after studying leadership for decades. Failure is not a dead end. It's a teacher. Every successful leader, every financially stable individual, every person who has built a life of impact has one thing in common. They learned how to move forward after a setback. Why? Not by denying failure, not by excusing it, but by learning from it. Failure doesn't define you unless you let it. It doesn't disqualify you unless you quit, and it doesn't determine your future unless you stop growing. The people who go the farthest aren't the ones who make the fewest mistakes, they're the ones who recover the fastest. They understand that mistakes are not verdicts, they are lessons. That setbacks are not signals to stop, they are invitations to adjust. And that growth always begins where comfort ends. This isn't a message about avoiding failure, it's a message about using it. Because when you learn to fail forward, failure stops being something you fear and starts becoming something that shapes you, shapes your thinking, shapes your leadership, shapes your financial wisdom. And once that shift happens, everything changes. Not because life becomes easier, but because you become stronger, wiser, and more prepared for what's next. That's what this story is about. Not success without mistakes, but success because you were willing to learn from them. Let me begin with something simple, yet powerful, something that took me years to truly understand. Failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is part of success. Now I know that sounds comforting, and you may have heard something like it before, but stay with me because most people say they believe this, yet live as if failure is something to avoid at all costs. And that one misunderstanding holds back more potential, more leadership, and more financial freedom than almost anything else I've seen in my lifetime. You see, most people don't fail because they're incapable. They fail because they're afraid of what failure might say about them, afraid it will define them, expose them, label them, so they play it safe. They don't start the business. They don't ask for the opportunity. They don't invest in themselves. They don't lead, not because they lack talent, but because they've attached their identity to winning. And when winning becomes your identity, failure becomes your enemy. But failure was never meant to be your enemy. Failure was meant to be your instructor. Every successful leader I've ever met, and I've spent my life studying leaders, has a relationship with failure that looks very different from the average person. They don't deny it. They don't dramatize it. They don't run from it. They learn from it. They learn from it. They understand something most people miss. You don't fail forward by accident. You fail forward by attitude. Attitude determines whether failure becomes a roadblock or a stepping stone. I've seen people experience the same failure, same loss, same mistake, same setback, and walk away with completely different outcomes. One grows bitter, the other grows better. The difference is never the event. The difference is always the response. Failure asks you a question. And that question is not, why did this happen to me? That question will keep you stuck. The real question is, what can this teach me? The moment you ask that question, failure loses its power to define you and gains the power to develop you. This is why failing forward starts internally. Before strategies, before skills, before success habits. It starts with how you see yourself when things go wrong. If you see failure as proof that you're not good enough, you shrink. If you see failure as feedback, you grow. And growth is the only thing that compounds. This principle applies directly to finances as well. People who never build financial freedom often aren't bad with money. They're afraid of making mistakes with money, afraid of investing wrong, afraid of trying and failing publicly. So they do nothing, and doing nothing is the most expensive decision of all. Financial growth, like personal growth, requires learning, and learning requires mistakes. You don't become wise with money by being perfect. You become wise by making errors early, small and teachable. The goal is not to avoid failure. The goal is to fail in ways that move you forward. This is why leaders must reframe failure, not just for themselves, but for those they influence. If you lead people who are afraid to fail, you lead people who will never fully try. But when you create an environment where mistakes are expected, examined, and extracted for wisdom, you unlock courage. Courage creates action. Action creates experience. Experience creates growth. And growth eventually creates success. Let me tell you something I firmly believe. The greatest limitation in your life is not your resources, your education, or your background. It's the story you tell yourself after you fall. If the story is, I'm done, then you are. If the story is, I'm learning, then you're just getting started. This is why failure often comes before clarity, before confidence, before calling. You don't find direction first and then take action. You take action, fail, adjust, and direction emerges. That's how leadership is formed. That's how financial discipline is built. That's how lives are shaped. Success is rarely a straight line. It's a series of missteps, corrections, lessons, and renewed commitment. And the people who win long term are not the ones who fail less. They're the ones who recover faster. They don't dwell. They don't defend. They don't deny. They decide. They decide to get back up wiser than before. As leaders, as professionals, as individuals who want to create value in the world, we must make peace with failure, not as a destination, but as a companion on the journey. Because if you're growing, you will fail. And if you're failing, you're probably growing. In the next part, we'll talk about attitude, the internal lens that determines whether failure sharpens you or scars you. Why responsibility is the bridge between mistakes and mastery, and how the right mindset can turn even your worst moments into assets for the future. Because when you change how you respond to failure, you change what failure produces in your life. One of the most important lessons I've learned about failure is this: failure doesn't shape your future, your attitude toward it does. Two people can face the same setback, the same disappointment, the same loss of momentum, and walk away with completely different lives. One becomes discouraged and cautious. The other becomes focused and stronger. And the reason is never intelligence, talent, or luck. It's attitude. Attitude is the lens through which you interpret what happens to you. It's the quiet voice inside that explains events before you ever speak them out loud. And that voice is either building you or limiting you. Most people don't fail because they lack ability. They fail because they carry an attitude that magnifies mistakes instead of mining them. When something goes wrong, they immediately look for someone to blame, something to justify, or some excuse to soften the discomfort. And while that may protect their ego in the short term, it robs them of growth in the long term. Growth requires ownership. You cannot learn from what you refuse to own. This is where responsibility becomes your greatest ally. Responsibility is not about self-condemnation, it's about self-empowerment. The moment you take responsibility for your response to failure, you regain control over your future. Blame gives away power. Responsibility gives it back. I've watched leaders stall for years because they spent their energy explaining why something didn't work instead of examining how they could grow from it. Every explanation delays progress. Every excuse extends the lesson. But when you say, "This happened, what can I do differently next time?" something powerful shifts. You stop being a victim of circumstances and start becoming a student of experience. Failure becomes information, and information, when applied, becomes wisdom. This mindset is especially important when it comes to money and career decisions. People often make one financial mistake and allow it to define their confidence forever. They lose money on an investment, make a poor business decision, or trust the wrong advice, and instead of learning, they retreat. They say, "I'm just not good with money." That statement is not a fact. It's a conclusion, and a limiting one. Financial maturity is not built by avoiding mistakes, it's built by evaluating them honestly. People who eventually achieve financial freedom are not those who never stumbled. They are those who refuse to repeat the same lesson twice. They asked better questions. What did this teach me about risk? What did this reveal about my habits? What boundaries need to change? That's failing forward financially. Attitude determines whether failure becomes a scar or a tool. A scar reminds you of pain. A tool equips you for the future. And tools multiply. Another critical piece here is perspective. Many people overestimate the significance of a single failure and underestimate the power of consistency over time. One mistake feels enormous in the moment, but when viewed in the context of a lifetime, it's often just a data point. Failure feels final only when you stop moving. As long as you continue to grow, failure is temporary. This is why resilience matters so much in leadership. People are not inspired by leaders who never struggle. They are inspired by leaders who learn visibly and lead wisely afterward. When leaders model responsibility, learning, and humility, they give others permission to grow. They create cultures where people improve instead of hide, and improvement compounds faster than perfection ever could. One of the most freeing realizations you can have is this: your value as a person does not rise and fall with your performance. When you separate who you are from what you do, failure loses its power to crush you. You can critique your actions without condemning yourself. That distinction is essential for long-term success, because if every mistake becomes a personal verdict, you'll eventually stop taking meaningful risks. And without risk, there is no growth, personally, professionally, or financially. Success belongs to those who are willing to be uncomfortable long enough to improve, and improvement always begins with an honest attitude. Let me say this plainly. The goal is not to avoid mistakes. The goal is to respond to them so well that they become assets. When your attitude is right, failure sharpens you. It teaches discernment. It builds patience. It strengthens character. And character is the foundation of leadership, trust, and sustainable success. In the next part, we'll look closely at how failure and leadership are inseparably connected, why leadership growth is impossible without setbacks, and how the lessons learned through failure become the very tools that allow you to lead others with wisdom and credibility. Because leadership isn't proven by success alone. It's proven by how you grow when success is interrupted. One of the great myths about leadership is that leaders are somehow different from everyone else, that they fail less, struggle less, or doubt themselves less. After decades of working with leaders at every level, I can tell you this with certainty. Leaders don't fail less than others, they fail more. The difference is not the absence of failure. The difference is what they do with it. Leadership has always been forged in pressure. You don't discover leadership potential in comfort. You discover it when things don't go as planned. When expectations collide with reality and someone has to decide how to respond. That's where leaders emerge. Failure introduces leaders to themselves. It exposes gaps in thinking, blind spots in character, weaknesses in preparation. And while that exposure can be uncomfortable, it's also incredibly valuable. Because you can't grow what you don't see. The leaders who grow the most are not the ones who avoid failure. They are the ones who reflect on it honestly. They ask questions instead of assigning blame. They look inward before pointing outward. They understand that every failure is feedback, and feedback is leadership's greatest teacher. This is why leadership growth and personal growth cannot be separated. If you want to grow your influence, you must grow your capacity. And capacity grows through stretch, not ease. Failure stretches you. It stretches your patience. It stretches your humility. It stretches your decision-making. And if you let it, it stretches your wisdom. I've noticed something fascinating over the years. People often want leadership influence without leadership responsibility. They want the title, the authority, the recognition, but they hesitate when it's time to own outcomes. Yet ownership is the very thing that builds trust. When leaders take responsibility for failure, even when it wasn't entirely their fault, they model integrity. They show others that leadership is not about being right, but about being reliable. Reliability creates safety, and safety allows people to follow. This is also where credibility is born. Credibility doesn't come from flawless performance. It comes from proven character over time. People trust leaders who have been tested and refined. A leader who has never failed may look impressive, but a leader who has failed, learned, and adjusted is dependable. And dependability is what people actually want. This principle applies strongly to financial leadership as well. Whether you're leading a family, a team, or an organization, how you handle financial setbacks speaks volumes about your leadership maturity. Financial mistakes are not leadership disqualifiers. Avoiding responsibility for them is. Leaders who fail forward financially are transparent, disciplined, and willing to adjust. They don't panic. They don't hide. They don't double down on denial. They learn. They create safeguards. They make wiser decisions moving forward. And those decisions build trust, not just in numbers, but in people. Another critical lesson failure teaches leaders is empathy. Leaders who have struggled understand others who struggle. Leaders who have stumbled don't shame those who fall behind. They coach instead of criticize. They guide instead of judge. Empathy is not weakness, it's awareness, and awareness is essential for influence. Failure also refines a leader's priorities. When things go wrong, what truly matters becomes clear. Ego falls away, distractions fade, values surface. This is why some of the most effective leaders I've known are those who were once derailed, disappointed, or delayed. Failure stripped away what was unnecessary and clarified what was essential. And clarity fuels focus. Focus fuels progress. Progress fuels momentum. Leadership is not built in moments of applause. It's built in moments of adversity. It's built when no one is clapping, when decisions are heavy, and when the outcome is uncertain. That's when character forms. And character, over time, creates influence that lasts. If you want to lead well, don't fear failure. Respect it. Study it. Use it. Let it teach you how to listen better, prepare better, decide better. Because leadership is not about being the strongest person in the room. It's about being the most teachable. In the next part, we'll talk about perseverance. Why quitting too soon is often the real failure. How resilience is built one decision at a time. And why long-term success belongs to those who refuse to stop learning and growing, even when progress feels slow. Because leadership doesn't advance in leaps, it advances in faithful forward steps. If there is one reason people fail that has nothing to do with talent, intelligence, or opportunity, it is this: they quit too soon. Not because they couldn't succeed, but because the journey didn't look the way they expected it to. Most people overestimate what they can accomplish quickly and underestimate what they can accomplish consistently. When progress feels slow, when results don't show up on schedule, discouragement creeps in. And discouragement, if left unchecked, whispers the most dangerous lie of all: this isn't working. But growth is rarely loud. It's usually quiet, repetitive, and invisible for long stretches of time. Perseverance is the discipline of continuing to move forward when there is no applause, no validation, and no immediate reward. It's the ability to say, I will keep going even when motivation fades. And motivation always fades. That's why perseverance matters more than inspiration. Failure often doesn't defeat people. Fatigue does. Emotional fatigue, mental fatigue, the weariness of trying again after disappointment. And this is where many people confuse wisdom with quitting. They say, I'm just being realistic. But realism without resilience becomes resignation. Perseverance is not stubbornness. It's not doing the same thing blindly and hoping for different results. Perseverance is thoughtful endurance. It's learning, adjusting, and continuing. It's saying, I didn't get the outcome I wanted, but I gained insight, and insight changes my next step. This mindset is what separates temporary failure from permanent defeat. The people who fail forward understand that setbacks are part of the process, not signs to abandon it. They treat delay as development. They treat resistance as refinement, and refinement always takes time. This principle applies deeply to financial growth as well. People often abandon good financial habits because results don't come fast enough. Saving feels slow. Investing feels uncertain. Discipline feels unrewarded in the short term, so they stop. But financial freedom is not built by dramatic moves. It's built by steady ones. Small decisions repeated daily, weekly, yearly. Consistency compounds, and compounding is quiet. The same is true in leadership. Influence is not earned in one speech, one decision, or one success. It's earned through reliability over time. People watch how you respond when things don't go your way. They watch whether you show up again after a disappointment. Every time you persist with integrity, trust grows. Perseverance also reshapes how you view failure. Instead of seeing it as a verdict, you begin to see it as a chapter. Not the whole story, just part of it. This shift is critical, because the moment you believe failure defines you, perseverance feels pointless. But when you understand that failure is simply information on the path to growth, perseverance becomes logical. You keep going because learning is still happening. One of the most important leadership qualities perseverance builds is patience. And patience is not passive. It's purposeful waiting. It's the ability to stay engaged while growth catches up. Patience allows you to mature emotionally, to make wiser decisions, to respond instead of react. And those qualities are essential for long-term success. There's something else perseverance teaches that few people talk about: humility, like key. When progress takes time, ego is forced to step aside. You learn that success is not about proving something to others. It's about becoming someone better yourself. That's healthy. Leaders who persevere don't measure their worth by speed. They measure it by progress and alignment. They understand that the right pace is the one that allows them to grow without breaking, and this is why perseverance protects you from burnout. Burnout often comes from trying to rush growth or force outcomes that aren't ready. Perseverance, on the other hand, respects the process. It says, I will stay faithful to the work, even when the results are still forming. That mindset creates stability. Stability creates confidence, and confidence sustains momentum. In the next part, we'll talk directly about money and stewardship, how failure can shape financial wisdom, why setbacks with money don't disqualify you from success, and how disciplined, values-based decisions lead to lasting financial freedom. Because failing forward isn't just about achieving more, it's about becoming wiser with what you already have. Few areas of life carry as much emotion, fear, and misunderstanding as finances. And because of that, few areas offer as many opportunities to fail forward if we're willing to learn. Most people don't struggle financially because they lack opportunity. They struggle because they were never taught how to think about money through the lens of growth, responsibility, and stewardship. A financial mistake feels different than most other failures. It can feel permanent, embarrassing, heavy. People don't talk about it openly, so they assume they're alone. And when shame enters the picture, learning usually exits. But here's something I want you to hear clearly. Making a financial mistake does not make you irresponsible. Refusing to learn from it does. Money is a tool. And like any tool, wisdom comes from use, not avoidance. People who eventually build financial freedom don't do so because they never failed. They do so because they treated every financial setback as tuition, not punishment. They asked questions instead of hiding. What decision led me here? What pattern needs to change? What principle did I ignore? Those questions transform loss into wisdom. Financial freedom is not about luck or timing. It's about consistency, discipline, and perspective over time. And those qualities are shaped far more by correction than by success. Early financial wins can actually be dangerous. They can create false confidence and poor habits. But early financial failures, when handled well, create humility and structure. They teach boundaries. They teach patience. They teach you that money responds to behavior, not intention. This is where stewardship becomes so important. Stewardship is the understanding that what you have today is not just for today. It's meant to be managed with tomorrow in mind. People who fail forward financially learn to think long-term. They stop asking, what do I want right now? Steady people make better financial decisions. Steady leaders create trust, and trust attracts opportunity. Financial failure also invites accountability. When things go wrong, it forces you to face habits honestly. Spending, saving, planning, discipline. But faithfulness, showing up, learning, adjusting, continuing, is what builds character strong enough to carry success when it finally arrives. And success does arrive. Not always when you want it, not always how you expect it. But it comes to those who refuse to quit learning,